Hey guys, it's Rush. Hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to the channel. This video today, I want to go into some detail regarding my current pad crisis. To give some background, I've been playing Street Fighter since Street Fighter 2. Admittedly, the first serious Street Fighter game I played was Street Fighter 5, but I've always played on a 6-button fight pad. In Street Fighter 5, the fight pad I used the most was the Horfighting Commander, the PS4 version. This pad was discontinued and it became increasingly more difficult to get your hands on a PS4 Horfighting Commander. Between the end of Street Fighter 5 and transitioning to Street Fighter 6, I stumbled upon a new pad, the BTOP controller. Whilst the BTOP C3 is a really good pad, I wasn't 100% settled on my controller choice, so recently I've explored many other options, trying different pads, trying to find the next new pad for me. So in this video, I will rank the 4 pads that I have in order, advising of the pros and cons in my opinion. So the Horfighting Commander is the pad that I have the most mileage on. This was my go-to pad for Street Fighter 5. I never found a 6-button fight pad that was better than this at the time, but that's not to say this wasn't a good control pad. So the shape of the pad is fantastic. It's a nice chunky design. It's pretty big in terms of the face of the pad. It's a fat control pad. It's pretty chunky if you look at it from that perspective. And it has got a groove here, which I think is good for grip as well. So holding this pad feels great with the grip, with the chunkiness, and you've got slight handles here, I guess. So you do have a nice hold on the controller. And the D-pad placement and the button placement, it's all centralized, so it's really well laid out. These are in line. I do speak about that a lot on the channel. The buttons are in line with the D-pad. And the actual buttons on the face, they're not anything special. They are quite soft to press, but you can hear and feel when you press them. So I've never had an issue with mispressing buttons or pressing the wrong button. I always get the button and I always press it down enough, so it's nothing spectacular, but it functions very well. But I think the size and the layout, the spacing of the buttons it's perfect on this. There's no complaints at all. With the shoulder buttons, I've discussed this many times on the channel, but some of the best shoulders in the 6-button fight pad arena in my opinion. Small front shoulders, but not super sensitive. You get a nice click, you get a nice feeling when you press them, and the back ones are bigger. They use that extra surface area space. You know, you got the lip, and with the lip you get more surface area. So you got some big back shoulder buttons. So really good design in my opinion from that perspective. In terms of button configuration, I have this pad configured where I use all the face buttons, and I also use, I'll call them R1 and R2. So I predominantly use these 8 buttons. And with Street Fighter 6, I was able to map the L2 button as well to be its own move. So I could utilize 9 buttons altogether on the PS4 version. On the Switch version, you can map all 10 buttons. So I get all 6 there and all 4 on top. And that's really good. That gives me the ability to map all my buttons, any mechanics that I want to map to this pad. So that's a really good point with this controller. The D-pad is where this pad is let down. It has a cross-shaped D-pad, which some people say they prefer. I don't mind it too much, but I don't think it's as good as the circular D-pads, and it's quite small. The other thing with these D-pads is the D-pad does work loose, and you get very funky inputs over time. So that's where this pad is not good. That's the only bad part. So it makes sense to talk about the BTOP C3 fight pad. This is the pad that I used after the Horfighting Commander. This controller is very similar in terms of its large face. Got a very big face to the pad. In terms of its thickness, it's not quite as thick as the Horfighting Commander. It doesn't have that lip at the top. It does have a bit of a groove, which is nice, but it doesn't have that predominant lip at the top. The actual layout of the buttons and the D-pad are decent, very, very good. Actually, the D-pad being a little higher than the Horfighting Commander is better. I prefer the location of the D-pad. The buttons themselves as well are very similar. They're similar size. I'd say they're slightly smaller. They do have more resistance when you press them, but it doesn't mean it's bad at all. I like the feel of these. They feel a bit more sturdy than the Horfighting Commander. The D-pad is circular as well, you'll notice as well. And it does have 4 shoulder buttons. So they are shoulders as well, but they are very small. So that is worth noting. So in the hands, it feels great. You get a nice hold on the pad. Your thumbs are positioned exactly where you want them. The D-pad location, as mentioned, is nice. Your thumb sits over the buttons. These shoulders are a negative in my opinion. They're very small and they have a lot of resistance when you press them. So I don't like the fact they're so close, they're so small, and you do have to press them quite hard. Sometimes when I've gone to press one, I've accidentally pressed both at the same time. That's happened a few times. Other than that, the buttons themselves feel good. The D-pad is very good, especially when you first have one. But this D-pad will become a little loose, so it's not so much D-pad wobble. It doesn't become misaligned, but it's very sensitive. You'll notice that you can press the directions a little too easily. There's not enough resistance on the D-pad. So over time, I do feel the D-pad begins to get it's very easy to get misinputs, more so as time goes on, and it loosens up. So that's one other downside of this pad. Not only the shoulders being so small, the D-pad is it can be too sensitive, I feel. So not a massive issue, but it is a significant thing I noticed with time on the pad. With the button mapping, I can have these 6 buttons mapped here and these 2 as well. So I have 8 buttons that I can set in game. I cannot map these 2 buttons, so I can't have a 9th or 10 buttons. That's another down point of this pad. So next on the list is the BTOP M30 controller. This is a new one with the 4 shoulder buttons. This controller is really nice, but what does stand out straight away is how small the pad is. It's very, very small. The surface area of the face of it is small. It's quite slim, and it doesn't have a grip on the back of it. So these are not great things when it comes to the design of the pad. The buttons themselves on the face of the pad are designed off of the Sega Saturn pad. So you have smaller top buttons, bigger bottom buttons, and the D-pad is pretty much the exact same as a Sega Saturn D-pad. The shoulder buttons are super close because of how small the pad is, so there's not much space at all between the shoulder buttons on each side. The back ones are pretty big. Even the front ones are big enough, bigger than the BTOP, but they are close, so that's not great. But that's a limitation of the pad by design, the fact that it's so small. The way the actual buttons and the D-pad feel when you have your grip on the pad, they do feel good. I do like this D-pad a lot. It feels really nice. The buttons feel great as well. And it's not too difficult to get to the shoulders. But again, coming back to the fact of how small the pad is, my hands don't really fit comfortably on the pad. I have to if I hold it tight, my fingers are sort of sitting in the middle. My thumbs are sitting at the top of the D-pad and the buttons there. I have to loosen the grip. I have to hold the pad a bit further away in terms of my finger positioning to get a better grip on shoulders and the D-pad and the face buttons. But by doing that, I can feel my accuracy is not great. So that's the main downside to this pad. I don't like the fact that it's so small. You can get used to it. I got used to it, but that doesn't mean I like it. In terms of the button configuration, it's perfect. You can map the 6 buttons independently. You can map all 4 shoulder buttons independently. So that I do like about this controller. It's really good that I can map all 10 buttons. So last but by no means least is a Soundware Supply /Direct Fightpad. This is a chunky pad. It's really, really big. So it has a small face to it, but combine that with the handles and the way your hands fit. So if I have my hands around the handles, my thumbs sit exactly where I want them to be on the D-pad and the buttons. So I love the way it feels in terms of its design. Combine that with the thickness of the pad. It's a very chunky pad, and it has a huge curvature at the top here. Your hands just sit so nice on the control pad. It is really, really well designed from that perspective. So regarding the D-pad, the buttons, you have a big D-pad that sits in line with the buttons on the face of the pad. You have 7 buttons on the face of this pad, which I love. I think it's a really good idea. But the thing is, the buttons are small. They're very small and they're very close. The shoulders are really good. You have smaller front shoulder buttons, but they feel great. They're big enough. You have a significant gap between the front and back shoulders. The back shoulders, again, feel good. They're chunky. They're big because you have that larger surface area at the top. The D-pad is amazing on this control pad. Not only is it very accurate, the fact that you have like ridges for the up, down, left, right, and it's circular. The way this is designed, it's bigger than it looks, but it's very, very accurate. Doing inputs on this D-pad feels amazing. So in terms of the button configuration, the 7 buttons on the face of the pad can be mapped independently. 16 and 14, I forget which way they are, but they are basically left stick down, right stick down. So you can use 14 and 16 instead of these 2 buttons. That, like I said, is a great idea. I personally think 14 should have been with the face buttons as well. I don't think that button being there makes sense. Maybe the design thought was that this would be an additional options button rather than a mechanical or an attack button. Makes sense from that perspective, but I still think having 8 buttons here would have been a really good idea. When it comes to the shoulders, L2 and R2 are mapped independently also, but you cannot map L1 and R1 independently. If you try and map these buttons, you will lose these buttons on the face of the pad. So to rate these 4 pads in order, In last place will come the SANDW controller. The reason this comes last is because of the size of these buttons. I just think it's such a terrible design choice. They're tiny, they're so small and so close. And it's the button configuration. The button configuration for me is not great. If you don't mind not having all 4 of the shoulder buttons mappable, then it's not so much a big deal. But I would have liked to have the ability to map the 10 main buttons, so the 6 face buttons at least, and these 4 shoulder buttons. In terms of the design, the shape of it, the best one out of the lot. This is the best shape and design in my opinion. And I want to say the best D-pad as well out of all of them. So in third comes the 8BitDo M30, a really nice control pad, but the size of it lets it down. It's very, very small and it's not very comfortable when playing for long periods in my opinion. It's very difficult to get a good grip on the pad, but the button layout is fantastic. The D-pad is fantastic. I can't knock it for that. I have heard reports of the pad breaking, however, the shoulders coming loose, and the D-pad not being as responsive or being inaccurate. So that's worrying. So I haven't had that experience, but I haven't put many miles on the pad. So it's worth mentioning that. But for me, this comes third. So in second place comes the Horfighting Commander. A almost perfect controller, great buttons, great shape, great shoulders, great feel in the hands. That's only let down by the D-pad. If this had a circular D-pad, if this had a Sega Saturn D-pad, this would be the perfect pad. But it's very tough to get accurate inputs on this D-pad. It does deteriorate over time, and that for me will always be the downside of the Horfighting Commander. So that means first place goes to the BTOP C3. This pad has a better D-pad than the Horfighting Commander. It has a good layout in terms of the positioning of the buttons and the size of the buttons. It does have 2 working shoulders, so you can map 8 buttons, which I like. The downside for me are that you can't map all 10 buttons and the D-pad becoming a bit loose. So it's not a massive issue, but it is noticeable. So I want to throw that in there just for people that have got miles on the BTOP and that may be experiencing the sensitivity that I'm experiencing. So I can still play on it and it's not super bad, but I do notice the sensitivity can throw me off. You may have noticed that I didn't include the Sega Saturn Pro controller. I no longer have this pad, I sent it back. Predominantly because it's a wireless pad and I don't want a wireless controller. And also because of the button configuration where you can only map the 6 face buttons and 2 of the 4 shoulder buttons. I didn't really understand the advantage of this pad over the standard Sega Saturn controller. So I am on the lookout for a standard wired USB Sega Saturn control pad, which I'll review later on the channel. But the problem with that pad is you only have 2 shoulders left and right. So not a massive issue. But I do prefer having 6 face buttons and 2 shoulders on the right. And the addition of having something mappable on the left is a bonus for me. So it's not really a pad that I would like from a button configuration perspective, but the Sega Saturn pad was fantastic from a design and D-pad perspective. So that's it for this video. Hopefully the information's helped in terms of summarizing my thoughts on my current control pad crisis. The pad I'm using right now is the BTOP, and whilst I do like it and I rate it top 1, it's still not 100% comfortable in terms of what I want from a fight pad. The shoulders are very small. I don't like the fact that I can't map something on the left shoulders, and that D-pad becoming loose is a worry for me. So I do feel like I need another BTOP to replace this one, but I don't want to go in the cycle of having to buy a new pad every 3 to 4 months because of a D-pad becoming loose. So I'll see what happens. If anything changes, I'll keep you guys updated with more gamepad, control pad videos on the channel. Hope that's helped. Any questions, any queries, give me a shout, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.